I walked out of a house once, middle of the night, 2 in the morning, dead quiet neighborhood. The kind where the only sound is a dog barking 2 streets over and porch lights left on for nobody. I walked to my truck, sat in the driver's seat, and did not start the engine for a long time, and I want to be completely clear about something. I did not walk out of that house because I was afraid. In 14 years of doing the work, I was never afraid of anything inside a house. Fear was not in my vocabulary. That is not the kind of person I was. I walked out because my assignment could not function in that environment anymore. Because whatever we had placed inside that home, whatever we had anchored in the atmosphere of those rooms, was coming undone. Not slowly, not gradually. It was coming undone fast, and the cause was something happening inside that house that I had been warned about, but had never fully believed until that night. There was a family in there. Husband, wife, 3 kids. Middle class, regular people. Went to church on Sunday, came home, lived their lives, paid their bills, argued about normal things. On paper, exactly the kind of target our unit preferred. No obvious spiritual armor. No one in the congregation knew they were being watched. Just regular Christians doing regular Christian things. But something was different in that house, and I'm going to explain exactly what it was. My name is Caleb. I grew up in a small mill town in the rural Midwest, maybe 4,000 people. The kind of place where the plant closing meant half the dads were either drinking or gone by the time you were 10. Churches on every corner, but nothing filling the hole that growing up poor and fatherless leaves in a boy. I was not a bad kid. I was an empty kid, and empty kids are exactly who they come looking for. By 17, I was running with a motorcycle club. By 19, I had been recruited into a unit inside that club that had roots going way further back than bikes and leather. There was a whole other side to that brotherhood. Rituals, hierarchy, loyalty oaths that went places most of the regular members never knew existed. I was brought in deliberately, specifically, because someone in the leadership saw something in how I read people and environments. They called it sensitivity. I did not know what that meant yet. What it meant was that I had a natural ability to assess the spiritual atmosphere of a space, to feel the resistance or the openness in a home before I had even crossed the threshold. And that ability, cultivated and trained by the higher-ups, made me one of the better home assignment operators in our unit. I placed assignments on over 340 Christians in 14 years. Pastors, deacons, intercessors. Married couples the leadership identified as too spiritually connected to let grow unchecked. Solitary prayer warriors who were hitting something in the spirit realm that needed to be disrupted. I targeted them all. And my success rate, measured by disrupted prayer life, broken household atmosphere, relational deterioration and spiritual dryness within 6 weeks of placement, was 78%. I kept records. I was systematic. I am not telling you this to boast. I am telling you this so you understand that what I'm about to share is not theory. It is not interpretation. It is operational intelligence from someone who spent over a decade learning, by trial and failure and adjustment, exactly what creates resistance in a Christian home and what does not. Because some things created resistance, significant resistance, the kind that made the work difficult, sometimes impossible. And the number one source of that resistance, the pattern that showed up again and again in homes we could not crack, in assignments that collapsed before they took root, was specific scripture prayed by believers before they went to sleep. Not generic prayer, not devotionals, not reading a few verses and calling it a night. Specific psalms, specific texts prayed with specific intentionality, specifically in the hours before sleep. 3 psalms in particular. 3 that came up in our post-analysis reports again and again whenever an assignment failed or destabilized. 3 that the leadership warned us about and that I, through direct experience, learned to treat with real seriousness. Tonight I am going to walk you through all 3. I'm going to explain what they do in the spiritual atmosphere of a home. I'm going to tell you why they work, based on everything I observed from the other side. And I'm going to show you how to use them properly, because there is a right way to pray these psalms that activates their full force. And there is a way most believers pray them that leaves half the power on the table. I walked out of that house because the family inside was using these weapons correctly. Every night before they slept, they were doing something that 14 years of organized work against Christians had taught me to recognize as genuinely dangerous to what we were trying to do. They were not just praying. They were sealing their home. They were calling God into the fight. They were making it impossible for us to maintain a presence in that atmosphere. And I am here tonight because the God they were calling on decided to come looking for me too. Let me tell you everything. First, you need to understand something about how this kind of work was structured. And I know some of you watching this have never thought about demonic assignments as something organized, something strategic, something with timing and scheduling and resource allocation. A lot of believers think about spiritual attack the way they think about bad weather. It just happens, random, hard to predict, nothing to do but endure it. That is not how it works. Not at the level I was operating. Everything we did had a window, a preferred time of deployment, and across every unit I was associated with, across everything I was trained in, the nighttime hours were consistently identified as the primary deployment window, specifically the period between 10 at night and 3 in the morning. The leadership's explanation was this. During daytime hours, a believer is engaged. Their mind is active. They are in the world, processing, responding, praying spontaneously, talking, making decisions. Their conscious resistance operates at full capacity because they are using it constantly. But in the hours before sleep, something changes. That analytical, conscious engagement begins to quiet. The believer transitions from wakefulness to rest. And in that transitional state, that space between being fully alert and being fully asleep, the spiritual defenses of a person operate differently. The conscious filter drops. The spirit of the person becomes open in a way it is not when they are wide awake. That is the window. That openness, that vulnerability of transition was what we targeted. Now, here is what most people assume when they hear that. They assume it means Christians are more vulnerable at night. And the truth is, for most Christians, yes. For most believers who finish their day with a quick prayer, maybe read a couple of verses out of habit, and roll over and close their eyes, that window is completely unguarded. The transition into sleep is an undefended passage. And an undefended passage in the spirit is exactly what an assignment needs to establish a foothold. But some believers understood something that most of their church did not. And this is the thing I want you to really hear. Some believers understood that the transition into sleep is not just a vulnerability. It is also a moment of profound spiritual significance. That the last thing you bring into the night, the last words you speak out loud, the last spiritual posture you deliberately take, establishes the atmosphere of your home for the hours when your body rests and your spirit is most open to the unseen. They understood this because the Psalms taught it to them, and the ones who prayed specific psalm-based warfare prayers before bed, not casually, not out of habit, but with deliberate intentionality as an act of setting the spiritual atmosphere of their home, created something that made our assignments functionally useless. Let me explain what I mean by that. In the work, the leadership used a term I heard consistently over many years, atmospheric integrity. When a home had high atmospheric integrity, it meant the spiritual environment inside that home was actively hostile to assignment placement. Not just resistant, hostile. The difference matters. A resistant home is one where an assignment can be placed, but takes longer to anchor, requires more reinforcement, costs more resources. You can still work in a resistant home. It is just harder. A hostile home is different. In a hostile home, the assignment cannot anchor at all. You deploy it and it destabilizes. Or you approach the property and feel the resistance before you are even near the structure. Something in the atmosphere is working against your work. Think of it in physical terms. Some spaces have air that feels heavy and stagnant. Other spaces have air that feels alive, circulating, almost pushing back against you. That is the closest physical analogy I can give to the difference between a sealed and an unsealed spiritual atmosphere. What we found over years of tracking patterns, analyzing successes and failures, reviewing reports from multiple operators, was that sealed homes, homes with genuinely hostile spiritual atmospheres, had one thing consistently in common. The occupants prayed specific scripture in the hours before sleep, not just any scripture, specific psalm texts, and 3 of those texts came up with enough regularity that they made it onto what I would call our internal awareness list. Texts to watch for. Texts that, when prayed consistently before bed, created an atmosphere that we could not penetrate effectively. The first one is the one you probably already know, but I'm going to tell you why it works in a way that nobody in your church has probably told you. Psalm 91. He who dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty. You have heard this one. Your grandmother probably had it on her wall. Your pastor has preached it. It is the go-to protection psalm, and most Christians treat it the way they treat a seatbelt, something you reference when things get dangerous, but otherwise do not think much about. That is a serious mistake. What I observed over years of attempting to place assignments on homes where Psalm 91 was being prayed specifically before bed, not just referenced, not just remembered, but prayed out loud as a deliberate declaration of territorial coverage, was a consistent pattern that the leadership could not fully explain and could not consistently counter. Let me be precise about what we observed. Verse 11 of Psalm 91 says, "For he will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways." Now, one of the first things an experienced assignment operator does when approaching a target home is assess the level of angelic coverage already in place. This is real. Angelic presence in a home is something you can sense if you have been trained to sense it. Some homes have minimal coverage. Those are the easiest to work in. The assignment anchors quickly, often within hours. The spiritual atmosphere is open, unguarded, unmonitored. But homes where Psalm 91 was being prayed consistently before bed had a different quality of angelic presence, not just coverage, activated coverage. It was as if the act of praying that psalm was functioning as a deployment order. Every time that text was prayed with genuine faith and territorial intention, the atmosphere of the home shifted into an active defense posture, not passive. Not just a covering sitting there quietly, active, mobilized, responsive. And the specific verse that created the most consistent problems for us was verse 13. You will tread on the lion and the cobra. You will trample the great lion and the serpent. I know that sounds like poetry to a lot of you. It sounds like ancient metaphor. But in 14 years of doing this work, when that verse was prayed with specific intentional authority over a home, when a believer stood in their living room at 10 o'clock at night and declared that verse as a claim over every inch of their property, whatever we had placed in that environment began losing stability. The anchor points of the assignment started pulling loose. I have watched assignments that had been functioning and causing real disruption for 2, 3, 4 weeks, collapse in 48 hours because a believer started praying Psalm 91 this way before bed. I watched it happen enough times that it stopped being surprising and started being something I reported to leadership as a threat to operation. But here is the critical part, and I need you to pay attention to this because most believers miss it entirely. Psalm 91 operates at full strength only when it is prayed with what I am going to call territorial intention. Most believers pray this psalm over themselves. He will command his angels concerning me, personal coverage, and that is real and it matters. But the believers who created sealed homes prayed it differently. They prayed it over the ground, over the physical structure, over the walls and the doors and the windows. They prayed it over the thresholds, and this is significant because a threshold is a spiritual as well as a physical entry point. They declared the psalm as a territorial claim. This home, this property, this air inside these walls, every room, every corner, this is covered, this is claimed. When believers prayed it that way, the effect was measurable in the atmosphere within hours. I have stood outside homes where this prayer was being prayed and felt the shift happen in real time. The atmosphere of the home changing from accessible to closed, from open to sealed. If you are watching this and you have a sense of heaviness in your home at night, if there is tension in your rooms that has no clear source, if sleep is consistently disrupted in ways that feel like more than just stress, if there is a weight that lifts when you leave and settles back when you return, I want you to take Psalm 91 seriously, not as comfort, as a weapon. Pray it out loud before you sleep. Name every room, cover every threshold. Make a territorial claim in the name of the Most High over every inch of ground your family occupies. Pray it that way every night for 2 weeks and watch what changes. Now, before I get to the next one, I need to tell you about something. That is why I want to tell you about something called Destroying Assignments, the 14-day deliverance protocol. It is a complete system that teaches believers how to identify and destroy the most common demonic assignments. This protocol covers every type of assignment we used: financial attacks, marriage attacks, health attacks, and destiny attacks. This protocol was developed by believers who understand spiritual warfare, and I myself went through this protocol after my deliverance. It was part of my healing process, learning how to recognize and break every assignment that I had helped to place on people. The link is in the description. Do not wait. The enemy does not wait. All right, let me tell you about the second psalm. Most believers would not pick Psalm 35 as a bedtime prayer. It does not read like a bedtime psalm. It opens like this: Contend, O Lord, with those who contend with me. Fight against those who fight against me. That sounds confrontational. That sounds like something you pray when you are in a crisis, when something has already gone wrong, when you are in the middle of a battle you cannot win on your own. Not something you say before you close your eyes on a Tuesday night. That misunderstanding served our purposes extremely well for a long time. Here is what I need you to understand about why Psalm 35 was specifically flagged in our awareness system. Psalm 91, as I described, is primarily a sealing psalm. It activates coverage, it deploys angelic presence, it is essentially defensive in nature, even though it has offensive elements in the later verses. Psalm 35 is fundamentally different in what it does. Psalm 35 is counteroffensive. It does not just cover the believer, it calls for direct, active, targeted action against whatever has been sent against them. It asks God to become a combatant on the believer's behalf, not just a protector. Take up shield and buckler. Arise and come to my aid. Verse 2. Brandish spear and javelin against those who pursue me. Verse 3. The leadership spent real time trying to develop counters to Psalm 91. They eventually developed some techniques for operating near sealed homes, partial workarounds, ways to reinforce assignments even in a covered atmosphere if the prayer discipline of the household dropped for even a few days. They never developed an effective counter to Psalm 35 being prayed consistently. Never. And the reason is specific. An assignment, once placed, is not a static thing. It is not a bomb you drop and walk away from. It requires maintenance. The entity responsible for executing the assignment needs to return to the target environment periodically to reinforce the anchor points. Think of it like maintaining a radio signal. If the signal is not regularly boosted, it degrades. If we placed an assignment on a family and were unable to return and reinforce it at regular intervals, the assignment would weaken and eventually fail on its own without any action from the believer. But homes where Psalm 35 was being prayed every night before bed did not just create difficulty with maintenance, they created active interference with the maintenance process itself. Verse 5. Let them be like chaff before the wind, with the angel of the Lord driving them away. Verse 6. Let their way be dark and slippery, with the angel of the Lord pursuing them. When a believer prays those verses with the understanding, even partial understanding, even incomplete understanding, that something real has been assigned against their life and their household, something they need God to actively pursue and remove, it functions as a judicial appeal in the spiritual court of heaven. They are not just asking for protection. They are asking for God to become an active combatant against their adversary. And the response to that prayer, when prayed consistently, is the deployment of an opposing force that begins actively working against our work, not passively resisting, actively pursuing and disrupting. The leadership had a name for this: counter-assignment. When they analyzed a failed or collapsing assignment and found that Psalm 35 prayer was present in the household, they would note in the report that the failure was due to counter-assignment from prayer activity, meaning the prayer itself had generated a spiritual response that was now functioning as a directed force against our deployment. In practical terms, what this looked like was this: an assignment that should have required reinforcement every 12 to 14 days would begin destabilizing at day 4 or 5. The anchor points, the spiritual hooks that keep an assignment tethered to a household's atmosphere, would begin pulling loose as if something was actively working to remove them. Reinforcement attempts would fail. The entity would approach the threshold of the home and encounter what I can only describe as an opposing deployment already in position. I'm going to tell you about a specific situation without identifying details, because this one illustrates it more clearly than anything else I witnessed. There was a married couple that our unit had targeted for a marriage assignment. The objective was to introduce chronic low-grade tension, not explosive conflict. That is easy to identify and fight. Chronic tension, the slow kind. The kind that erodes trust and intimacy over months, without either partner being able to name exactly what is wrong. We had placed that assignment effectively, and it was functioning. For 5 weeks, the situation in that home was tracking exactly where the leadership wanted it. Then it stopped. Within 10 days of something changing in that household, the assignment had destabilized to the point of being non-functional. Standard reinforcement protocol failed twice. The higher-up over my unit came to me specifically because this assignment had been considered high priority. He wanted me to review the situation, find out what had changed. What had changed was the wife. She had read a Christian article somewhere about bedtime prayer practices, nothing sophisticated, just some blog post about praying scripture before sleep. And she had started praying Psalm 35 over her marriage every night before she went to bed. Not because she knew about assignments, not because anyone had told her what was happening. She just felt led to do it. She prayed it over her husband, over the atmosphere of her home, over what she described in her own prayers as whatever is trying to get between us. That assignment never recovered. We eventually abandoned the target. The cost of attempting to maintain a deployment against a household where Psalm 35 was being prayed consistently before bed outweighed the potential outcome. Now, the reason this psalm is specifically devastating to marriage assignments is something I want to explain carefully, because it will help you understand how to use it. Marriage assignments operate through division. That is the mechanism. They work by making the two parties unable to accurately perceive the spiritual source of the conflict between them. The husband and the wife start to see each other as the source of the problem when the actual source is external. The assignment succeeds precisely when both people are fighting each other instead of fighting what is against them. Psalm 35 dismantles that. Verse 19, "Do not let those gloat over me who are my enemies without cause." Verse 24, "Vindicate me in your righteousness, O Lord my God." When a believer prays those verses specifically in the context of their marriage, Lord, vindicate me and vindicate my spouse against whatever is actually against us, it opens a clarity in the spiritual atmosphere of the home. It shifts the perception of the person praying. They start to see the conflict differently. They start to feel that the enemy is something other than the person across the breakfast table. And when that shift happens, when even one partner starts to see clearly, the assignment's primary mechanism is broken. Now, if this is hitting home for you, if you have been dealing with unexplained tension in your marriage, with conflict that keeps circling back to the same wounds without ever truly healing, with a wall between you and your spouse that neither of you put there consciously, I want you to participate in something powerful right now. In the comments, write out this declaration: "My marriage is covered. No assignment stands against what God joined." Write it out. Do not just think it. When you participate in public declaration, when you put it in writing, something shifts in the spirit realm. I have seen it happen when believers participate together, so participate now. Take 10 seconds, write it out. I need to tell you something else about Psalm 35 before I move on to the third one, because there is a component of this psalm that specifically targeted a different kind of assignment, not just marriage assignments, but what I would call destiny suppression assignments. These are one of the most common types of deployment, and they are also one of the most damaging, because they operate slowly and their effects look like personal failure rather than spiritual attack. A destiny suppression assignment is exactly what it sounds like. The objective is not to destroy a believer outright. The objective is to keep them small, to keep them distracted, delayed, confused about their purpose, and never quite arriving at the thing they were created to do. These assignments are enormously effective because believers almost never attribute the symptoms to spiritual attack. They attribute them to their own inadequacy. The symptoms include a persistent sense that you are falling behind, that time is running out, that everyone else is progressing while you are stuck in place. Chronic delays in opportunities that seem just out of reach, a fog around your sense of purpose that lifts briefly and then settles back. A heaviness specifically around the areas of your life where your calling is located, your gifts, your ministry, your creative work, whatever God has placed in you that the assignment is designed to suppress. Verse 27 of Psalm 35, "May those who delight in my vindication shout for joy and be glad. May they always say, 'The Lord be exalted, who delights in the well-being of his servant.'" When a believer prays that verse specifically as a declaration over their calling, over the thing they are carrying, over the destiny they sense but cannot quite reach, it is a direct invocation of God's will for their flourishing. It is a declaration that their breakthrough is something God himself desires. And the effect of that on a destiny suppression assignment is significant, because these assignments depend entirely on the believer's agreement with the lie that they are stuck because of their own limitations. The moment a believer stops agreeing with that lie and starts agreeing with God's delight in their well-being, the assignment's foundation starts crumbling. It cannot survive in an atmosphere where the person it is suppressing is actively declaring that God wants them to thrive. I want to tell you now about the third psalm. And I have to be honest with you. This is the one that affected me most personally. This is the one that, in my 14 years of doing the work, I witnessed producing the most immediate, the most undeniable, the most, I'm going to use the word, frightening responses in the spiritual atmosphere of a home. Not frightening to the believer, frightening to what we were deploying. Psalm 18. Let me read you how it opens because I need you to hear it before I explain what it does. "I love you, Lord, my strength. The Lord is my rock, my fortress and my deliverer. My God is my rock in whom I take refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. I called to the Lord who is worthy of praise, and I have been saved from my enemies." That sounds like a testimony psalm. That sounds like somebody looking back, recounting how God came through, how the battle was won. And most believers read it that way. Most believers hear the opening of Psalm 18 and file it under praise and thanksgiving. They associate it with worship, with gratitude, with the emotional register of celebration. I'm going to tell you what it looked like from the operational side, and I want you to understand that what I am about to describe I did not learn from a theology textbook. I learned it through repeated direct experience with homes where this psalm was being prayed, and the effects were consistent enough that it became one of the most discussed texts in the awareness briefings our leadership gave to active operators. Psalm 18 was written by David, and the critical thing to understand about the context of this psalm is that it was written after a military campaign. David is describing a moment where God intervened in a battle that David was losing. Not just losing catastrophically. The language in verse 4 through 6 makes that clear. "The cords of death entangled me. The torrents of destruction overwhelmed me. The cords of the grave coiled around me. The snares of death confronted me. In my distress I called to the Lord. I cried to my God for help." David is not describing a difficult season. He is describing a moment of complete overwhelm. The battle was lost. The enemy had him. And out of that total desperation, he called on God with everything he had. Look at verses 7 through 15. Look at what happens next in the text. "The earth trembled and quaked, and the foundations of the mountains shook. They trembled because he was angry. Smoke rose from his nostrils. Consuming fire came from his mouth. Burning coals blazed out of it." The text continues with violent atmospheric imagery, thunder, lightning, hailstones, the Lord laying bare the foundations of the earth. I need you to understand something. David is not using metaphor here, not entirely. He is describing, in the language available to him in his era, what an encounter with the full mobilized response of heaven looks like in the spiritual realm. The shaking, the fire, the thundering presence of a God who has decided to enter the fight in force. And when a believer prays Psalm 18 before bed, specifically with the understanding that they are in a battle, specifically as a declaration that they are calling on the God of verse 7, not the God of Sunday morning pleasantries, but the God who shakes the earth when one of his people is in danger, the atmospheric effect in that home is different from anything else I encountered in 14 years. Let me explain this as precisely as I can. Every assignment we placed on a household needed what I would describe as a maintenance of spiritual pressure. Think of it as atmospheric weight. For an assignment to function, the spiritual environment of the home needs to carry a certain pressure that suppresses the believer's sensitivity to the spirit realm. When their sensitivity is suppressed, they stop perceiving the threat. They stop fighting it. They attribute the symptoms to natural causes, and the assignment can operate freely. Psalm 91, as I described, activates coverage and deploys angelic protection. It seals the perimeter. Psalm 35 activates a counter-offensive, a directed force working to dislodge the assignment's anchor points. Psalm 18 does something that neither of the first two does. Psalm 18 calls the full presence of God himself into the atmosphere of the home. Not his protection, his presence. And when the full presence of God enters a spiritual environment, there is no pressure we can maintain. The weight of heaven simply eliminates the weight we have established. You cannot sustain spiritual pressure in an atmosphere where God himself is present in active response. The leadership once described it this way, and I never forgot it because it was one of the few times I heard genuine concern in his voice. When a believer calls on the God of Psalm 18 and means it, really means it, we are not contending with a protected person anymore. We are contending with the living God's direct attention. That is a different situation entirely. I want to tell you about the house. This is the house I mentioned at the beginning of this testimony. The house I walked out of at 2 in the morning and sat in my truck for a long time before driving away. The family had been on our target list for a year. The husband was a pastor, not a large congregation, maybe 120 people at most, but he was effective in a way that the leadership had identified as a problem. He had a gift for deliverance. People in his congregation were getting free from things that had held them for years. He was not flashy about it. He was not doing big event spiritual warfare spectacles. He was just quietly, persistently, effectively helping people break free. And that kind of sustained, quiet effectiveness was considered more threatening than the loud, visible ministries that generated a lot of attention but not much actual deliverance. We had placed a burnout assignment on the family. The objective was to exhaust the pastor, not destroy his marriage, not wreck his finances, not produce a scandal, just exhaust him, keep him so tired, so burdened, so drained that his effectiveness would simply decrease to the point of irrelevance. It is one of the most effective assignments for clergy because a tired shepherd leaves the flock unprotected, and he never connects his fatigue to anything other than the demands of ministry. The assignment had been working for 3 months. The reports I was receiving indicated it was functioning precisely as designed. The pastor was showing all the markers of significant spiritual and emotional depletion. His wife was worried. His elders had noticed. Then I was asked to go in and reinforce the assignment. Not because it was not failing, but the leadership wanted to accelerate the timeline, push him toward a breaking point faster. I arrived at the house late at night. Standard operating procedure. I had been in and out of that property twice before over the previous months without any significant resistance. On those visits, the atmosphere of the home was accessible. The assignment was anchored solidly. I expected this visit to be straightforward. I got to the edge of the property line and I stopped. Something in the atmosphere of that house was completely different from the previous 2 visits, not just resistant, not just sealed in the way I described with Psalm 91. The atmosphere was actively, forcefully, undeniably different in a way I had no framework to handle. There was a quality of light. I do not mean visible light, I mean something in the spiritual atmosphere that had no business being in a darkened house at 2 in the morning where a family was asleep. It was as if the home was occupied by a presence that made our entire deployment look small, made me feel small. I took 1 step toward the property line, and something in me said, with complete clarity, "You cannot go in there." Not a feeling. Not an emotion, a clear recognition, like approaching a fire. You do not have to decide not to touch it. You simply know you cannot. I stood at that property line for a few minutes, and then I turned around and walked to my truck, and I sat there. And for the first time in 14 years, I felt something I did not have a name for, something that felt like the first edge of a question I had never let myself ask. What if I am on the wrong side of this? I found out later, much later after I had left the organization, After I had given my life to Christ, after I had been going through my own healing process, I found out what had changed in that house. The pastor's wife had read something. A book about spiritual warfare, about practical prayer, and she had started a new practice. Every night before bed, she prayed Psalm 18 over her husband, over their home, over his ministry. She prayed the full psalm out loud, standing in the living room deliberately as a declaration of God's active defense over everything he had entrusted to her family. She started doing that 5 days before I came to reinforce the assignment. 5 days of Psalm 18 prayed with genuine conviction over that home, and the atmosphere had shifted so completely that a 14-year veteran of this work could not cross the property line. Now, if this is hitting home for you, if you are a believer who carries something for other people, a pastor, a prayer warrior, an intercessor, a parent praying for your children, anyone who feels the particular exhaustion of spiritual carrying, I want you to participate in something right now. In the comments, write out this declaration: God of Psalm 18, I call you into my fight right now. Write it out. Do not just think it. When you participate in public declaration, when you put it in writing, something shifts in the spirit realm. I have seen it happen when believers participate together, so participate now. Write it out. Now I need to tell you the specific way that Psalm 18 needs to be prayed to produce this effect, because there is a difference, and it matters. Most believers, if they pray Psalm 18 at all, pray it as retrospective thanksgiving. Lord, thank you for everything you did. Thank you for the ways you have already come through. That is not wrong. Thanksgiving is always appropriate. But what the pastor's wife was doing, and what the other believers I observed doing this most effectively were doing, was something different. They were praying it as a present declaration. Not, thank you for what you did. But this is who you are right now, in this moment, in this home, in this fight. You are my rock. You are my fortress. You are my deliverer. You are my shield, right now, in this house, in this night, in whatever is against my family. That shift from retrospective thanksgiving to present declaration is what activates the full weight of Psalm 18. It is the difference between reading a report about a soldier who protected someone in a past battle and calling that same soldier's direct line right now because you are under attack. Both are honest acknowledgement of who the soldier is. But only one actually brings him into the room. When you pray Psalm 18 before bed tonight, pray it as an active, present tense call. Name what you are fighting. Name what you need. Stand in your home and call on the God of this psalm the way David called on him in the moment of complete overwhelm. Declare verse 30. As for God, his way is perfect. The Lord's word is flawless. He shields all who take refuge in him. Declare it over every room, over every sleeping child, over every unresolved situation in your household, over every open door, every crack in the atmosphere, every place where something has been trying to get in. And then get into bed knowing that you have not just prayed before sleep. You have called the God of verse 7 into the room, and whatever is assigned against your home has to deal with that. The three psalms work together in a way that I want to explain briefly before I move to the final part of what I want to share with you tonight. Psalm 91 seals the perimeter. Think of it as establishing territorial boundaries. When you pray it with the intentionality I described, you are declaring covered ground. The spiritual atmosphere of your home shifts from accessible to claimed. Psalm 35 activates a counterforce. Where Psalm 91 creates a sealed boundary, Psalm 35 introduces an active pursuing force that goes after whatever has been sent against your household. It dismantles the anchor points of existing assignments and pursues the source. Psalm 18 calls the full weight of God's direct attention into your fight. Where the first two psalms activate protective and counter-offensive spiritual responses on your behalf, Psalm 18 does not call on intermediaries. It calls on the commander directly. Used together, 91 to seal, 35 to counter, 18 to call the commander. What you create in the spiritual atmosphere of your home is something that our unit had no reliable counter for. Not in 14 years, not at any resource level. The combination produced an atmosphere that was sealed, actively defended, and directly covered by the presence of the living God. There was nothing in our arsenal that could operate in that environment. I want to give you something practical here, because I know that some of you are thinking, 3 psalms is a lot to pray every night, especially before bed when I'm already tired. Let me address that directly. First, they do not need to be prayed in their entirety every single night. What creates the sealing effect is the declaration, the territorial claim, the intentional calling on God. You can pray key verses with full intentionality and produce the same effect as a full recitation without intentionality. Verses 1, 7, 11, and 13 of Psalm 91 cover the core of its protective structure. Verses 1 through 3 and 27 of Psalm 35 cover the counter-offensive core. Verses 1 through 3 and 7 of Psalm 18 call the commander. 6 to 10 verses, prayed out loud with territorial intention. 5 to 8 minutes of deliberate prayer, that is the investment. And what I observed from 14 years on the other side of those prayers is that the return on that investment, in terms of sealed atmosphere and disrupted assignments, was enormous. Second, consistency matters more than length. A brief, consistent, deliberate bedtime prayer over your home will produce a stronger sealing effect than an extended but irregular one. The atmosphere builds over time. Each night you pray these psalms over your household, the seal strengthens. The angelic coverage becomes established. The counterforce becomes deployed. The presence is called in and remains. Think of it as layering. 1 prayer seals, 7 prayers in a row seal and reinforce. 30 days of consistent prayer produces an atmospheric stability that is extremely difficult to penetrate from the outside. If you have been dealing with a heavy household atmosphere and you start praying these 3 psalms consistently before bed every night for a month, I am telling you from direct operational experience that you will notice a difference. Sometimes in days, often within 2 weeks, the atmosphere of your home will change in a way that your whole family will feel, even if none of them knows why. Now, if this is hitting home for you, if you have been dealing with a heaviness in your home that no natural explanation accounts for, if your sleep is consistently disrupted, if there is a quality of pressure in your household that lifts when you leave the house and settles back when you return, I want you to participate in one more thing. In the comments, write out this declaration. My home is sealed, Psalm 91, 35, 18. Come, Lord. Write it. Do not just think it. Participate out loud. Something shifts when believers put these things in writing together. So write it out now. I need to tell you what happened to me, because everything I have shared with you tonight is technically valuable. To knowing about these 3 psalms, knowing how to pray them, knowing what they do to the spiritual atmosphere of your home, that is practically important. That can change things for you tonight if you apply it. But I would be dishonest with you if I taught you how to close a door without telling you why I needed someone to close a door for me. And maybe you are watching this tonight and you are carrying something that is not just a need for better prayer strategy. Maybe what you need is what I needed. Not more information. A way out. Let me tell you about a man named Ray. I met Ray in a jail cell when I was 32 years old. Not because I had been arrested, because one of my closer associates in the Brotherhood had been arrested on a charge I will not specify, and I went to visit him. That visit required me to pass through a visiting area monitored by a chaplain. I had walked past hundreds of clergy in my life without any particular experience. Ministers, pastors, street preachers, outside bars, hospital chaplains. I had moved through all of that without a flicker of anything. People doing their jobs, occupying their roles, going through their motions. I walked past Ray and something happened that I could not explain and did not want to sit with. He looked at me. Not in a confrontational way, not in a way that indicated he knew anything about me. He looked at me the way a person looks at someone they have been praying for, specific, personal, without any reason to be. The kind of look that says, I see you, not your reputation, not your surface, not the version you have constructed to survive. I see you, the actual you, the one underneath everything. I had spent 14 years cultivating an immunity to exactly this kind of moment. Part of training in our organization was developing an ability to dismiss whatever stirred in you when you encountered genuine faith. You categorize it. Explain it away. Attribute it to psychology, to sentimentality, to the residual conditioning of whatever religious exposure you had as a child. You build walls around it until you cannot feel it anymore. Ray's look went through every wall I had built in 14 years in about 2 seconds. I did not stop. I kept walking, but something in that brief moment of eye contact lodged in me like a splinter, a question I could not fully suppress. Something in that man's eyes had absolutely no business being there in the context of my life. Something that was the exact opposite of every spiritual environment I had been operating in for 14 years. I drove home that day, and for the first time in years I felt genuinely, acutely, recognizably afraid. Not afraid of consequences, not afraid of getting caught, getting hurt, getting exposed. Afraid of the thing I had been running from long enough that I had almost convinced myself it was not real. Afraid that everything I had put my life into was the wrong side of a war I could not win. 6 weeks later, my closest associate died. He had gotten out of jail, he had come back to the Brotherhood, and 3 days after his release he was gone. The circumstances were not clean, and I was the one who found out first. I want to tell you what the hours after that were like, because I think this part matters for anyone watching this who has been in a place where everything they trusted finally broke at once. I drove out to a field that night. I do not know why a field. I just drove until there were no more buildings, and I stopped the truck and I got out. And I stood there in the complete dark, no sound except the wind, no people, no roles to perform, no loyalty to project. Just me and the sky and the complete unambiguous fact that the life I had built on the premise of power had just shown me in the clearest possible terms that it had no power over the thing that mattered most: life and death. All that years of doing the work, all that authority the leadership claimed and I had believed in, and it could not bring back one man, could not stop one death, could not do a single thing that actually mattered when the moment came that actually mattered. And for the first time since I was about 12 years old, I talked to God, not performed a ritual, not recited something, not approached a spiritual authority with a transaction in mind. Talked, like a person who has run out of options and has one door left. I said, I do not know how to do this. I do not know what comes next. I do not know if you want anything to do with someone who has done what I have done, but I am not going back, and I have nowhere else to go. That was it. That was my prayer. Not eloquent, not theological, completely desperate. What happened in the next few minutes standing in that field, I am not going to try to fully describe because I do not have language adequate to it, but I will tell you this. The weight I had been carrying for 14 years, the weight of a life given over to something that uses people and discards them and calls it power, that weight began to lift. Not completely, not instantly in some flash of cinematic transformation, but a crack formed in it, light got in, and the crack grew. I found my way to a small, non-denominational church in my area. Not the kind of church with a big production. Just a room with about 60 people who took prayer seriously, and took the spirit realm seriously, and took the Bible seriously. I did not tell them who I was or what I had been doing for 14 years. I just sat in the back and listened. After about 3 weeks, the pastor called me out. Not publicly. After service, he came up to me quietly and he said, I have been praying for you since the first Sunday you came in. I do not know your whole story. But I know you are carrying something heavy, and I know you are not meant to carry it alone anymore. That was the beginning of a process that took 2 years of genuine discipleship, genuine prayer, genuine accountability to get me to a place of real freedom. Not a clean, neat Hollywood-style deliverance where everything snapped into perfect order overnight. A real difficult, sometimes painful process of dismantling 14 years of spiritual and psychological formation and rebuilding on a foundation that was actually true. The Destroying Assignments Protocol, the 14-day system I mentioned earlier, and was part of that, not the beginning of my healing process, more like a structured map I used in the middle of it. Once I understood what I had been placing on people, I needed to understand how those assignments worked from the inside, so I could learn to recognize and break every one of them. That protocol gave me that framework. And it is the same framework I would put in the hands of anyone who senses that their breakthrough is being blocked, their prayers are being intercepted, their household is under active spiritual pressure. But I want to be honest with you about something else. The framework matters. The prayer strategy matters. The 3 Psalms I have described tonight matter. What matters more is the God behind them. I did not walk out of darkness because I learned better spiritual warfare tactics. I walked out because the God of Psalm 18 decided I was worth walking out for. Because in the middle of a field at 32 years old, completely empty, with nothing to offer and nothing to argue, something larger than my entire history came and found me anyway. And what I have spent the last 11 years of my life doing, what this channel is, what every testimony I give is not strategy, it is gratitude. It is me saying to every believer who is fighting what I spent 14 years deploying against people, you are not fighting blind anymore. You know how this works. You have the weapons, and you have the God who is already in your corner. Use them. All 3 Psalms tonight, every night. Because the enemy does not take a night off, and neither should you. Here is what I need to leave you with tonight. 3 Psalms. Prayed before bed. Prayed out loud. Prayed with territorial intention over your home, your family, every room, every threshold. Psalm 91. Prayed as a territorial claim. Name every room. Cover every entrance. Declare that the ground your family occupies belongs to the Most High, and that He has commanded His angels to guard it. Psalm 35. Prayed as a counter-offensive. Name what is against you. Ask God not just to protect, but to actively pursue and dismantle every assignment against your marriage, your finances, your calling, your household. Let David's words be your words. Contend, O Lord, with those who contend with me. Psalm 18, prayed as a present tense call. Not past tense, not retrospective, present. Call on the God of that psalm the way David called on Him when he had nothing left. Name your situation. Name your fight. Call the God of verse 7 into the room. I watched believers do this, and I watched assignments collapse. I watched households that had been under sustained spiritual pressure for months clear in days. I watched a family with an active, functioning, well-resourced deployment against them become untouchable, simply because a woman started praying 1 psalm before she went to sleep every night. That is real. That is not metaphor. That is what I witnessed from the other side of this war for 14 years. Now I am on this side, and the view is better than anything I ever had over there. If you found value in this testimony, please share it with someone in your circle who needs it. Not for the algorithm, for the family in your life whose home feels heavy and whose prayers feel blocked and who does not know why. Share it. Be the reason someone learns about these 3 Psalms before they spend another night unprotected. There is probably someone in your phone right now. A parent, a sibling, a friend from church who has been describing exactly the kind of household heaviness I have been talking about tonight. Send them this video, right now, before you forget. That act of sharing could be the thing that changes the atmosphere of their home this week. And if you have been watching this, and you feel something stirring in you that is bigger than prayer strategy, if there is something in you recognizing that what you need is not more information, but a way out of something, that door is open. That field is available. You do not need the right words, you just need to show up. Let me close tonight with a prayer over your home, right now. If you are willing, pray this out loud with me. Lord God, I come before you tonight as a parent, as a spouse, as a believer, as someone who is done fighting this war blind. I declare this home covered. I declare every room, every threshold, every window, every door, covered by the blood of Jesus Christ and sealed by the authority of your word. I pray Psalm 91 over this household right now. Let your angels be commanded concerning everyone under this roof. Let the lion and the serpent be under our feet, not over our heads. I pray Psalm 35 over this household right now. Contend, Lord, with everything that has been sent against us. Pursue and dismantle every assignment targeting our marriage, our children, our finances, our health, our destiny. Let everything deployed against us scatter. I pray Psalm 18 over this household right now. You are our rock and our fortress. You are our deliverer. You are our shield. God of verse 7, shake the earth on our behalf. Come into this fight. Be present in this home tonight. And Lord, I ask you to bring every assignment placed against this family to nothing, not weakened, not temporarily suppressed, to nothing, because we have called on you, and you answer when your people call, in the name of Jesus Christ. The name that our side feared more than anything else, the name above every name, the name that is the reason I am sitting here tonight, instead of still doing what I was doing for 14 years. In that name, amen. God bless you. stay protected. If this is hitting home for you, if there is one more thing you want to do tonight before you close out and get ready to sleep, write in the comments, Psalm 91, Psalm 35, Psalm 18, covered. Let the next person who watches this see that they are not alone in this. Participate together, because there is something powerful about believers standing in agreement, even across a comment section, against what has been sent against their homes. Participate. Write it out, and then go pray those 3 psalms before you sleep tonight.